This is titled How We Found Willow. Bear with me, it's a first draft. There's a lot of sentences that are crossed out and arrows pointing to other places, and a lot of just writing down words. We found her on the verge of exhaustion, in the welcoming of community and change. I had just returned from helping Claire move into her true home. We unfolded Claire's grandmother's quilt, a tropical rainforest with enough sun to carry the burden of her otherwise colorless walls and more. It was my first glimpse of her ancestors, and it happened to match her friend Miranda's painting beside the bed in color and message. Reality's tight if the music's right. This reminded me of the unfolding of Seattle for us. In the same area of Lake City that Claire resides in, catching a glimpse of a blooming Japanese camellia. This pink galaxy greeted us in the backyard of Tori's Airbnb. It belonged to a 26-year-old couple that baffled Tori, also 26 at the time, and how well they had their shit together, to quote. Well, picture me in my fawning days of 26 years old, pooping and singing the Ole Ole song inside a Merrymore Park honey bucket, as if I were the same 5-year-old kid in the dentist's office's bathroom. This convinced me that Willow was no more than a song's length away from being found. Would you call this as having our shit together? Many would say no, or it depends, what was the shit like? I guess. But for me, I'd say partially, or only 1/3. Sorry, Tori, I know it was your voice, Willow's annoying squeaking toy, Zuckerberg, and the power of Seattle's dog obsession that tangibly brought you two together. But for me, in that split moment where your phone died and you looked up blindly, feeling so close to her, but now left in darkness. In the areas Stephen believed Willow to be in from the very beginning, we were all laying eyes upon her in that moment. After any tension left from mom and dad visiting, in our clashing values, regressing into old habits or epicenters of hostility, this experience was as wonderful in offering gratitude for our differences, as terrible as it was in the feeling to be a mother who has lost her child, and the lost child in distress, crossing highways, seeking shelter from coyotes, or fleeing idiots who chase after a lost dog screaming its name. There are so many potential solutions one could get stuck in the choices. She could be anywhere. Where do I even look? Tori cried out. As Willow's mother, she had every right to lapse into fits of despair. Ultimately, she leaned on social media, which served the purpose it so seldom offers us typically: kindness, help, compassion, connection. Outside the moments of breath Tori felt was wasted by phone calls and messages from friends telling her to register her chip, and diverting phone battery from the one who would eventually track her down. In the end, it was none other than the mayor of Sammamish, one of the most wealthy communities in the area. And all of those messages and calls left Tori feeling amazed by her support network. Stephen's route was similar to mine, though much less weird. Understanding Tori needed someone to fill in the spaces she didn't have capacity for, calling all shelters, and helping distribute flyers and driving around in his car. I'd imagine smoking a lot of cigarettes to carry this burden or this hurt. Thinking, as he did, of logical places she could be. Coming back to moving Claire in as a celebration of our own personal baptism of change, we saw the pouring rain, and together we decided to run, prance, skip, sing, spin, as we made our way over to the closest free little library. I'm all over the spectrum with views on little libraries and pantries. On one hand, there are forms of mutual aid and attempts to reclaim knowledge or food security for the dispossessed. On the other, I look at all these pantries and get caught up in thinking that if I were houseless, I'd both appreciate and be troubled seeing all these tiny homes that sheltered paper and cans. Distancing myself from these thoughts, in my past, little libraries especially have served as a practice to embrace the unknown gifts that surprise us on the journey from A to B, and also a chance to exercise my belief in serendipity, walking, and a universal underlying force. Even though there was not a single book that enticed us enough to take back with me or her, still we went back the same way, laughing and shouting. But this year will bring so many hardships and challenges, but we will get through them. Fast forward a half hour later, and I'm physically depleted, about to learn the fact that Willow is missing. And I could be searching all night for her without an end in sight. If it weren't for Livie's immediate willingness to help, offering to drive and insure a Tori over the phone in ways that I couldn't, that she will be found, and we will look all night, I don't think I would have come to the path I chose as soon as I had in solidifying what my own role would be to finding Willow. It often confuses me in my initial reactions to death, loss, and visible grief. I largely go unmoved, being present when Grandpa died or Mother bleeding. Where is your compassion over her discovery of my magic mushroom stash? Even though I stand by my mushrooms, that question of hers has remained with me on similar occasions. I think despite not being the one to cry upon death's arrival, I walk with it like it's a dog for the rest of my life, waiting for it to inspire wonder, awe, and creation back into my life, and above all, hope. So naturally, after I got over immediate reactions of dread and resignation that Willow's existed to bringing Tori to a place of community and friends who care about her, or this was her time to go. But such things aren't helpful in a time when Willow could very much have been alive, and Tori has exhausted all of her own efforts to finding Willow and was on her way home. At this time, I felt the urge to settle into a path that practiced my own form of pleasure activism, where in order to find her, I would treat her as the dead who walked alongside and guided me along. Willow and I have an odd relationship up until this point. I greeted her with apprehension, knowing the responsibilities that awaited me as her involuntary uncle, but now voluntary, when my sister adopted her. She was adorable, but I was unfazed by that. I was worried that Tori was about to go on a similar path as her friend Kenzie, looking to Australian Shepherds, puppies, to propel them to Instagram fame status over beautiful selfies in front of Pacific Northwest with picturesque landscapes. Deep down, I knew Tori needed this dog as much as she craved friends who cared about her and a community that would support her during tough times. We all need this. Sure enough, I agreed to be Willow's caretaker for a few months. Our time together coincided with a budding relationship that felt detached from reality, with Abby's arrival. In Willow, I treated her as if preparation for Abby's own child in River. Funnily enough, Willow in human form is Abby's cousin, Abby's sister's daughter, Willow. Together, Willow and I ran in random intervals, stepping on elephant seal carcasses without realizing, and having conversations with all folks, as we carved a walking stick together that looked like moon, lion, and dragon in one. In my arms I held Willow on bus rides, humming the daily lullabies Abby and I traded each other that could have only been created through uncontrollably giddy new love. In many ways, this night resembled a rekindling or reawakening of this way of living that embodied those days watching Willow. We did not search well into the night. Livie had a long day ahead of her, but in those brief couple hours, I was filled with full belief, singing my heart out through the local cemetery residents thought she'd be hiding in now that it was dark. Singing those same tunes that filled our shared days that now felt like a myth, protecting me from uncertainty and fear. This unearthly energy propelled me, singing without end, jogging without end, covering more ground than I ever thought I would have otherwise. I found a discarded soccer ball that reminded me of the same one we found at Ross Park one muddy, rainy day that fueled our soccer obsessions, with the brand also being Wilson, Tori's nickname for Willow. Then I started kicking the ball, running, singing, finding Pokemon cards, feeling like a little naive child in the face of death. I kept this attitude until the very last second, as I ran into the dark Merrymore Park, and Livie wouldn't go any further. Only then did fear and doubt exist, suddenly terrified by whatever unknown creature that called from the ravine. Livie and I sat in the car, silent and tired, driving back home via a route that took us 50 minutes to get back instead of what should have been 15. But we didn't care, as we'd find comfort in the words of Vietnamese writer Ocean Vuong. In this book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, Ocean has a passage on visiting Vietnam, where once in the middle of the night, he heard what sounded like a parade, a brightly colored market. Later, he learned that when someone dies in the middle of the night, drag queens are hired to dress up and dance, holding a celebratory-like gathering that wards off death's appearance. He described it with the phrase, unicorns stamping in a graveyard. These words very much describe how I felt and provided much hope for the next day to come. Then I started to work at Earthcore, where as Willow faded from my life, so too did the relationship with Abby. This brought Claire and I together, a human presence that often amazes me for her ability to hold grace, understanding, wandering, and patience as was needed in my time with Willow. The next day, I continued the singing, making connections with people, hitting the soccer ball and running, until one nice person told me how the soccer ball would scare Willow. I decided to think about my time at Earthcore, and more importantly, Claire. I often hear how life is not linear, but spirals up. My time at Earthcore consisted of me army crawling through literal willows and blackberry bushes amongst many other shrubs, unable to comprehend the mysterious thicket that was why I was struggling to harness what I offer to communities for a community-oriented organization. Even though in those last weeks my experience felt hypocritical and a massive setback or failure, I saw this as an opportunity to repurpose my experience at Earthcore as if I were cutting out passages and pictures to offer my loved ones for Christmas collage pieces. I squatted down at level with the blackberry roots that could shelter Willow from the coyotes. I walked along the riparian zones, wondering if she would go down for a drink of water. I read all of the park signs that gave me insight into the land, the Snoqualmie, Snohomish, Coast Salish peoples that came before us. I read aloud of signs, asking me to compare the bark of black cottonwoods and ash trees to the willow. I was asked to look through the willow's mysterious thicket, catch a glimpse of the yellow warbler in around the wetlands, to ponder forest succession in the meadows, pondering what will one day outcompete the hardhack and willows that currently invade. I read aloud questions of the forest. Does it seem more quiet? Is it darker? Signs commanding me to look carefully, and you'll see their interdependence. In this land of a former 1910 world-famous Willowmore farm, in this land of bumblebees that imbibe the sugary nectar of dogwoods, I ran around reading aloud these signs as if they were made again for the sole purpose of finding Willow, both Tori's dog and the native tree that is crucial to the salmon's needed meandering river-winding ways, eroding with the indigenous people's wisdom as more indigenous women are now going missing in the state of Washington than any state in America. I walked backwards to move forwards, next to one of the most expensive areas to live in Washington. I called out to Willow, saying the names of all the loved ones she knew: Seth, Erica, Livie, Stephen, Claire, Abby, River, Marissa, KP, Kenzie, Indy, Tori. The list goes on. Mom, Dad, whatever. The irrational went to extreme lengths. I drank as much water as I could to pee on as many trees as possible, thinking she might smell something familiar from days I secretly peed outside in public settings with her. I picked up, exhaled on, and spoke to every abandoned tennis ball I could find along the river, and I sang while pooping in a honey bucket. Maybe this is as similar to Mom and Dad sending Tori those prayer cards or messages. I felt this was all needed, and in one of my last efforts, I sat in surrender, waiting for Tori to pick me up to regather our thoughts, and decided then to listen to a song I wrote inspired by Willow. Ultimately a song inspired by Livie's book that uplifted her own community, called This I Believe. It was toward the end, lost in the mystery of it all, when Tori called to tell me someone spotted her and she was on her way to pick me up. She did, or rather it was Stephen, who was on his way to the location he thought she'd be in from the very beginning. From there, she was found. I say all of this, yearning for more clarity, understanding, and hope for each other as we continue to be confronted with other forms of crisis. My class is learning mandalas this week in art, where the teacher described each circle as a new level up of growth. I view this experience similarly, and am feeling confident that whatever the future may bring, even as I write these very words, that we'll be there for each other in the best ways we know how to show up. We'll trust each other and have patience to see past the crashing waves. Mother's still waiting for me to write a song about her, and yet what I appreciate the most about her is her ability to notice nature's simple beauties, of sunsets, swans, and lakes, the call of a white-throated sparrow. Can't you see that's all I'm trying to do in these writings, these songs, to notice her? Father's waiting on me to communicate better, and to not wait so long before sharing with him my troubles, as does Claire. But don't they know how much it means to me to see Claire standing outside her new home of red bricks, waving goodbye as I drive away, much like my grandmother, his mother, stood outside a house similar to Claire's. I helped Dad throw out so much after grandmother's death. He wouldn't reach out to others for help. I helped my recent neighbor move out to Greece, none of her friends wishing to help her due to COVID beliefs. How sad it was to see her, scrambling to decide what was wasteful and what was of value. I write here to make it known how much we all need each other. Happy birthday, I love you.
Such a bizarre invention. I don't know what's happening in people's minds, but I like it.
This was so nice to wake up to. Take quite ever time.